Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's BU Alumni Career Weeks webinar, 5 Ways to be a Better Listener and a Better Spouse, Employee, and Friend. My name is Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Career Programs team here in the Office of Alumni Relations. Today's webinar is sponsored by the BU Alumni Relations Office and is offered to our 326,000 alumni around the globe. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. We aim to do this by providing alumni with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. It's important that we get your opinion on how we're doing, so we very much look forward to receiving your feedback via a survey that will actually be emailed to you about early next week. We haven't figured out what day it's going out yet. So please be on the lookout for that. I know that we have alumni joining us today from faraway places like Hamburg, Great Britain, India, Italy, Kazakhstan, New Zealand, Qatar, Peoria, Arizona, Orinda, California, Denver, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Potomac, Maryland, Bloomfield, Michigan, League City, Texas. Our presenter is presenting from Cairo, Egypt, and we, as always, have dozens of alumni joining us from Massachusetts, from towns like Attleboro, Methuen, Lincoln, Belmont, Tewksbury, Jamaica Plain, Reading, Dover, and more. Please know, for all of you out there, we really do appreciate your opinion on this program and every program that we offer. Before I introduce today's speaker, some brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is being hosted on our brand new Zoom webinar platform. If you have any trouble with the audio or visual portions of today's presentation, I'll ask that you call Zoom support directly at 1-888-799-9666. You want to jot that number down again, it's 1-888-799-9666. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the Alumni Association website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions you may have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A module. You'll find you can click on Q&A either at the top or bottom menu of your screen to submit your questions. And we should have plenty of time to get to all of our questions during today's presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker from the day. Again, presenting from Cairo is BU School of Public Health alumna Alanna Shaikh. Alanna is an aid worker and executive coach. She splits her time between global health consulting and helping professionals find lives that work for them. Her focus is on developing the personal bravery needed to create meaningful life in a system that doesn't necessarily support it. Sometimes this is about helping people find the time to start or nurture a family. Sometimes it's about supporting people as they make decisions about what work deserves their full devotion. Alanna is a senior TED Fellow. Her TED Talk on bravery and Alzheimer's disease has been viewed more than 1 million times. I definitely urge all of you to check it out. It's a really moving piece by Alanna. Definitely check that out. She holds a master's degree in public health, again from BU, and was trained on coaching by the Healthcare Coaching Institute in an ICF certified program. Alanna, thanks so much for being here today. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. I'll be here. If you have any tech problems, just say, hey, Jeff, what's going on? I'll be muted, so it might take me a second before you hear me. But thanks again, and take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Jeff. So I'm going to be talking today about ways to be a better listener and how being a better listener makes you a better colleague, a better spouse, a better friend, a better parent, a better person to be in the lives of other people. Now, what I'm going to go through today is a little bit about me, although I think Jeff really covered most of that. And then I'll talk about what's not listening, why good listening is important, and then I'll take you through the 5 ways that I've found are really useful in terms of being a better listener. The first one is to recap the words of the person that you're listening to avoid expectations, to restrain yourself from trying to fix the problems, to inhabit the silence, and then to open your heart. And that comes together into sort of a handy little acronym, which is radio, because pretty much a radio is what you don't want to be. You don't want to be broadcasting. You want to be listening. So about me, as Jeff mentioned, I am an aid worker. I work in international health and development, a lot of program design, monitoring, evaluation, different kinds of management support, basically trying to help organizations do good things for the world on kind of a macro level. And then in the other half of my career, I try to connect with the individual people who are trying to do good things. And it's sort of very satisfying to have that combination of trying to improve systems and then working directly with individual people who are trying to do good and support those people. It's really exciting when I'm working with a coaching client and I see that they're finding a career that has meaning for them, or speaking up more at their job, or really finding the things that matter to them and doing good work in their own way. I have a website, thisworldneedsbrave.com. I'll put the address up at the end in case you want to read more stuff that I've written or learn more about what I do. And so let's get started. So I want to start by talking about what's not listening, because most of us aren't listening. We're standing there waiting for our turn to talk, sort of mentally timing them. Okay, they've probably got another 30 seconds and then it's me. Sometimes we're making assumptions about what people are going to say next. Like we've got this sort of narrative in our head, and whatever they're saying, we're trying to fit into that narrative. And listening is not trying to solve other people's problems. That's one that a lot of us fall into, especially caring people, especially people who are managers at work or parents, that like when someone is describing a problem they're facing or something that's frustrating them, you immediately want to jump right in and offer your opinion because you know what's going to make it better and you want to share that. But most of the time, that's not what people are looking for when they're talking about challenges. They want to talk it out. They want to find their own solution. They don't want you to hand it to them. You don't know them in all that much detail or their situation. There's no reason that your handy-dandy solution is going to be the perfect one. So listening isn't about pushing your own opinion in every chance you get. And it isn't about daydreaming while somebody else talks. Listening is about sincerely focusing on what the other person is communicating with you. And listening is really, really important. So last year, 2017, was the safest year for air travel in the history of aviation. And part of that is because we've got better airplanes. But at the same time, we have more people traveling, we have more planes in the air, we have more going on. One of the big things that's made air travel so much safer is cockpit communication training, teaching pilots how to listen. Because when your pilot can actually listen to his flight crew, to flight attendants, to what's going on, then he can make better decisions. The flight crew is more alert to problems, better able to find good solutions when they can actually listen to each other. So flight crew communications training is one of the reasons that air travel is so much safer. They do the same thing in operating rooms. Surgical teams are being trained in better communications because when people talk and listen to each other during surgery, patient outcomes get better. Listening is important. It's important in other situations too. It's important at work to be a good listener because listening lets you really understand what your colleagues need and connect to them. It's important in your romantic life with your partner or your spouse because you don't know who they really are if you're not listening to them. Listening to your spouse is connecting to your spouse. Listening to your children is what makes you the kind of parent who genuinely understands them. And if you're someone who doesn't really listen, over time that adds up in your life. Some people are actually going to pick up on that you're not listening, and they're going to avoid you. They're going to disengage from you romantically or at work or in a friendship context. In other cases, it's just going to mean that your relationships stagnate. Your friendships never get deeper and more personal. Your romantic relationships stay superficial and shallow and don't deepen into the intimacy that means lifelong companionship. At work, your teams don't gel into the kind of exciting, high-performing teams that you want to be on. Everything stays on sort of a surface level if you're not a good listener. Because if you're not hearing them, you're not understanding them. And if you're not understanding them, all you have is your own narrative. You don't have the other person's perspective. So now I have a poll for you, which is what is the most frustrating, the most annoying thing that's happened to you because somebody wasn't listening? So here are your options. The first one is, okay, what's the most annoying thing that's happened to you because someone didn't listen? My parents have no idea what I do for a living. My boss doesn't know that I'm the one who developed all her favorite projects. Cab drivers keep taking me to the wrong BU campus. Or my spouse thinks I actually enjoy getting cleaning supplies for Christmas.
A lot of those answers are coming in furiously. We'll just give it another second here, okay?
All right. So I will tell you that one of the options on that poll actually happened to me. I was at BU last summer and I got in an actual argument with the cab driver because I was trying to go to the School of Public Health and he was desperately trying to take me to main campus. And it was like he couldn't stop, I don't know, putting his own idea on me long enough to hear me say, like, medical campus.
All right, well, I'll share the results so you can see. Looks like our top answer was about people's boss.
Yeah, managers are really major culprits in not listening. And I think part of it is about that desire to fix things, that when their employees are talking to them, they're already trying to fix their employee's problem as opposed to sitting down and listening. So babies are excellent listeners. Their entire survival as tiny, helpless little beings is about being good listeners. Everything they learn from the world is about listening and observation. It's required of them. That's how they learn to go from babies to people. Babies learn to talk by listening. So we all have the ability to be a good listener because we were born a good listener. But as we get older, we start analyzing, we start making assumptions and problem solving, trying to fit what we observe into a larger picture of the world. And you have to do that. That's how you grow up. That's how you mature and learn things. But to lose the ability to go into full listening mode is a loss. It's something that makes you less able to connect to others. So in some ways, when I talk about being a better listener, I want us all to be more like babies, to be able to access that sort of infant's ability to be completely focused on something else and totally without judgment or assumption taking in what's being communicated to them. And if you ever feel like you can't be a good listener, or you can't learn to be a good listener, the fact is at one point in your life you were. And you know this because you're alive and you speak a human language. So at some point you were a good enough listener to learn to talk, and that's a pretty good listener. So let's talk about radio, the 5 ways to be a better listener. It starts with, now, let me start by saying that not everybody is going to use all 5 of these approaches at the same time. It isn't meant to be that you should be thinking to yourself, radio, as you're talking to someone and trying to incorporate all 5 tactics. In fact, what it is that you should listen to me talk about each one of them, think about the different ways, and think about which one's going to work for me. Which of these 5 strategies for being a better listener resonates with me and is something I can use? You might find that you can use all of them at different times. You might find there's only 1 or 2 that you really like. But I'm hoping they're different enough that everybody can find at least one that works for them. So we'll start with recapping. In a lot of ways, this is the easiest way to be a better listener. And it's as simple as it sounds. When you're listening to somebody and they're telling you about whatever's going on with them, you listen to them really sincerely and intently. And then when they pause, when they offer up your turn to speak, you recap what they just told you. It's that simple. If someone's telling you a long story about the frustrating commute they have and the accident they saw on the road and you missed the commuter rail, then when they pause, you just say, it sounds like you had a really frustrating day. You saw this accident and it frightened you, and then you almost missed your commuter rail and you got to the office and you were really flustered. And that gives them a chance to say, no, that's not the point. The point is this, and to tell you the real point. Or they feel listened to, they feel understood. They know you were listening and they know you understood them because you just told them so. You proved that you had their words in your heart. So recapping is surprisingly powerful because it makes the other person feel comfortable and it makes the other person feel immediately listened to. When you can tell them what they just said, they know that you were paying attention. The next strategy for being a better listener really is about accessing that sort of baby state. Avoid expectations. Very often when we're talking to someone, when someone's talking to us and we're listening to their story or the thing they're explaining or they're talking about their feelings, we're placing our own expectations on their experience. We're adding our judgments. We're thinking about where this is going to go next. You know, if they're telling us how frustrated they are with their boyfriend or their girlfriend, in your head, maybe you're thinking, oh, and now she's going to complain and she really ought to break up with him. Or you're thinking, and now this is the part where he tells me his girlfriend never does the dishes. Stuff like that isn't listening. Trying to put your own narrative on whatever they're telling you isn't really listening. Listening is keeping an empty mind that's focused on what you're being told. So avoiding expectations. The third strategy for being a better listener is about not fixing things. So the D is for don't fix it. If someone wants to tell you about a challenge they're facing or an experience they have, something difficult in their lives, you're really going to want to jump in and offer advice, offer solutions, sometimes even to offer to do something for them. Most of the time, that's not what people want. When people want advice, when people want a solution, they will ask you. They will say, what do you think I should do? Or do you have any advice for me? Or what can you suggest? People are not shy to ask for advice when they want advice. And when they don't want advice, don't give it to them. Because when you're thinking about advice, when you're looking for a solution for them, again, it's a distraction and you're not listening. Because if you're already running off in your head, I had a friend who adopted a St. Bernard and things were going really badly with the St. Bernard. And she was worried she was going to have to give up her dog. And when she was talking to me, it was really easy to mentally start thinking, okay, do I know a trainer? Can I recommend a dog trainer? Can I recommend a good brand of treats? Maybe she should be shaking a can full of pennies. But like all of that was taking me away from being with her in that emotional moment. And she's a full-grown woman. She's owned dogs before. She knows that you can shake a can of pennies at them. She knows that you can hire a trainer. And she doesn't need me to tell her that kind of basic stuff. She needs me to sit there and be her friend with her and listen to her anguish and to listen to her worrying. And maybe to recap her words and say, I hear how worried and frustrated you are. Especially as a boss or a parent, it's really tempting to fix things. As a parent, you might actually know better. You have more experience of the world. You already lived through 7th grade. You have perspective that your child doesn't have, and you really, really want to share it. But probably the fastest way to get your kid to stop talking to you is to give them advice. And I'm a parent myself. I have 2 kids, and this one kills me. I work so hard not to give them advice all the time. But when I'm talking, they're not talking. When I'm giving advice, they're not listening to me in any sincere and open-hearted way. They're sitting there waiting for mom to stop talking. And as a manager, you know, your employees are adults. They need to grow as employees and as people, and you don't necessarily know their situation. You don't know every detail, and they're competent professionals. You need to give them room to solve their own problems, to find their own solutions. And you want your employees to tell you the truth. You want your employees to be comfortable coming to talk to you. And if you jump in to fix everything, they're going to shut down too. They're not going to give you a heads up that trouble might be coming if your immediate solution is to start barking answers at them. They just want to. So the summary here is, if someone's telling you about a situation that's challenging, your friend, your colleague, your romantic partner, they're not asking you to solve it for them. And if you're thinking about solutions, you're not listening to their words, you're in your own head. And you don't want to be in your head, you want to be listening to them. Now we're moving into the slightly trickier approaches to being a good listener. And this one I call Inhabit the Silence. The best way, I think, to think about inhabiting the silence is that in every culture, there's an amount of time that you leave at the end of a statement to show that you're done talking. And different cultures have different amounts of acceptable pause. Everyone knows, I think, about fast-talking New Yorkers. New Yorkers leave almost no pause before they jump in to speak. Uh, American Southerners are supposed to be slower talkers. They have more pauses. They can easily get run over by these East Coast people who think they're done talking. I've noticed that often people from West Africa have a long pause, but that doesn't mean they're done talking. They just culturally have longer spaces, and you need to leave a little more room. So when you're listening to someone, when you're in a conversation, and they come to what seems like the stopping point, or it seems like the end of their statement, give them an extra 2 or 3 beats just to make sure that they have time to add a little more if they want to. Just create that space in the conversation. Take a full deep breath, count in your head, do whatever you need to do to create just a little bit more time. If they're from a culture that needs more time, then you've given it to them and you've given them the chance to actually complete their thought or their idea. If they're from a culture that doesn't necessarily need that time, it's still a gift for them. So if they did have one more thing they realized that they wanted to add, you're giving them that space to add it. And creating that silence also shows that you are listening. You care about what they're saying. You're not jumping in. You're giving them the floor and them the space to talk. In an adversarial conversation, a conversation that's difficult or feels like it's going badly, inhabiting the silence can be a very powerful way to let the other person calm down and feel like they're being heard. In that case, in that kind of conversation, if you're talking with, say, a colleague and it feels like they're actually yelling at or attacking you, if you give them 5, 10 beats of silence, sometimes people will talk themselves right back into being reasonable. Sometimes all they need is the space to think it through while they're upset out loud, and they will come around to a more reasonable perspective. I had a supervisor once who used to, he was really, really busy, and he didn't necessarily read all his emails in detail, like in depth. He tended to skim them because he had so much on his plate. And then he'd get angry about what he'd read in the email, often because he didn't understand the nuances because he was skimming it. And then he would call me into his office basically to just complain and get angry about something that was generally a big misunderstanding. And you know, your impulse there is to like jump in and start arguing, but that isn't what he wanted, and that's not really a great place to be in as an employee. So instead, what I learned to do was just give him some space. Explain whatever this thing was that he was so upset about his misunderstanding, and then I'd give him like 5 extra beats to think it through. And then very often in that time, he'd talk himself right around. He'd be sitting there complaining that I hadn't gone into enough detail in the memo that I had written, and now that he was going to have to rewrite this whole memo and everything was a disaster. And then he'd sort of, in those 5 beats I gave him, stop and say, well, I guess I didn't really look at your memo in detail. It's possible that you did get to this issue. And then sometimes he'd even go and like open it up on his computer while he was talking to me and say, oh, I see you did mention this and you mentioned the other thing. Okay, well, then we're set to go. Thank you for coming in. And he'd sort of talk himself all through it. And I think me giving him that space to settle in, rather than revving it up with more anger and energy, but just to sort of some relaxed, calm, accepting energy, gave him the space he needed to come around and move on with what was going on. Now, the last strategy for being a better listener is the one that people often find the hardest. And it's the one that feels the most sort of out of your comfort zone, I guess a little bit woo-woo, if you want to say. And it's about opening your heart to the person you're talking to the person who's talking to you. So to do this, you actually sort of think about your heart in your chest. You picture your heart there, the seat of your emotions in Western tradition. I lived in Uzbekistan for a while. In Uzbekistan, your emotions live in your liver. I'm not quite ready to open my liver while I'm talking to people, but I've gotten pretty good at opening my heart. So you think about your heart there. You think about the emotions it contains, and you sort of picture it. Some people like to picture it as like a ball of glowing light. Some people picture their actual anatomical heart or a big red Valentine's heart or just sort of an energy nexus with no particular form. And then you picture it sort of opening up. and expanding and reaching out to the person who's talking to you. And you picture sort of the energy from your heart connecting to the energy from their heart. And I know it sounds a little bit spacey, but I've found that it's a really powerful way of helping me stay completely focused on what's being said, is that visualization of my open heart and their heart serves, I think, as a reminder that like every single person is valuable. Every single person is another human being, and their humanity is valuable just like mine is. And I think that that recognition, that understanding comes through in my body language. On the phone, it comes through in my voice. And I think it makes other people feel comfortable and feel ready to talk to me and to tell me the true things and the important things and the things that we need to talk about. It's easiest to open your heart when you're talking with someone you love, with your parent or your child or your partner or your family or your dear friends. Of course you want to open your heart to them. Your hearts and their hearts already have a connection, and it's easy enough to just sort of mentally activate that. But activating that helps you stay focused on their words, not daydreaming, not solving their problems, not letting your mind wander, but listening sincerely to them. And over time, you may find that you're more willing and more able to open your heart in other conversations. If you're talking to a colleague, if you're talking to a professional contact or somebody you've just met, that it's enough to know that like your shared humanity is a connection between you, and you can recognize that by opening your heart. So I hope that some of these strategies seem useful and seem like something that you can use in your everyday life. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here today. I know that probably for most of you, all you New England people, this is lunchtime. So I assume that you've been eating the whole time I talked. Some sort of mushy food, right? Because you're in the office, you don't want to make a crunchy noise around your colleagues. So I appreciate you all sitting there with your headphones and your quiet food listening. And if anyone has questions, I'd love to answer questions.
Alanna, that was great. We do have at least one question that's come in, but while we sort of wait for folks to chime in here, I often like to invoke moderator privilege and ask one of my own questions. You've said so many things today that I feel like I could have a 20-minute conversation with you about. I know in my professional life and in my personal life, active listening, being a good listener is something I really struggle with. I'm constantly running that mental list in my mind of all the things that somebody said and how I would like to respond to that, or ways that I feel like I can contribute to a conversation. I know that sounds maybe a little bit like making it about me and not about them, or that I'm trying to fix something. And of all the questions I have for you, I guess the one that I want to ask is, when you find yourself in a situation, maybe particularly at work, where the person on the other end of that conversation isn't active listening, how do you find that balancing point of being able to address all the important points, all of your feelings, the things that you have to say about a certain topic, if your focus is really sort of making it about them? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I guess a lot of this presentation was on the assumption that you're in a conversation that is sort of more even and collegial. But when you're in a situation where you need to make certain points where it's important professionally, usually, to like, there are a couple things you can do. One of the things you can do is you can use that sort of sense of how long a pause should be against them. And if you're really in sort of a performative situation where you need to be heard saying something, you can step on that pause. And like, if you know that there's like a 2-beat pause, you can just jump in and grab it ahead of that and say your piece. But in general, once in a while you're going to be talking to a real jerk and they're just going to run on forever. But most of the time, if you're really engaged in listening, it makes people want to give that back to you. It shifts the energy of your conversation in a way that they start naturally making space for you too. I mean, not always. Sometimes you do get these people who just live life as a monologue. And, you know, then you have to get sort of adversarial with them. But most decent human beings, if you pace the conversation in a way that's sincere and listening to them, they will give that back to you.
Thank you. We got a great question from Phoebe, but again, folks, please use the Q&A box. If you hover over the top or bottom of your screen, you should see a little icon for Q&A. Just click on that. You can type your question in. Phoebe's asked, what are good questions to ask to continue a conversation about a problem without offering up solutions? She's asking specifically about, I think, managing things with her kids, but she's also hoping you can address that from the point of view of being a manager as well. So what are the questions you can ask to sort of keep a conversation going without offering up solutions?
One thing I like to say is really simple, and it's just, tell me more about that. You know, often people give you the shorter version because they think you don't care, they don't want to bug you. And if you just say, tell me more about that in a very sincere way, like you really want to hear more about that, very often people will open up and tell you more about that. You can also ask, sort of pick an aspect that you're interested in. Like with kids, you can say, you know, how does that make you feel? It can be tempting to sort of project an emotion on them, like, does that make you feel sad? Does that make you feel frustrated? But often just saying, how does that make you feel? Gives them a space to open up and do it. Or if you want to move them, if you suspect they have a solution and they want to tell you about it, you can say, like, are you thinking about solutions? Are you thinking about options? Do you have a sense of how you want to move forward? And then sometimes you can say, is that the real problem? I say that a lot when I'm coaching, that like the first 1, 2, sometimes 3 problems are not the real problem. Sometimes you have to ask that question a lot, like, is that the real problem? Is there something else going on here? And, you know, it's like one of those Russian nesting dolls until you find the actual problem at the heart of things.
Got another question that's come in. I think recapping what others say is a good way to initiate good listening. Do you have a strategy that would help the recapping process?
Strategy to help the recapping process. Yeah, it can feel a little awkward when you first start doing it, because it's just like, here I am repeating their stuff back to them. Isn't this going to sound stupid? But it's so powerful for people to know that, like, you heard them and that you can say what they said, that you were paying enough attention, you can repeat it back to them. So, you know, use your own words. Like, that's why I say recap rather than repeat, is it should be a 1 to 2 sentence version of what they just told you, and it should be in your own words.
Michael's asking, how would the principles that you've covered today apply to a job interview or a professional networking situation? Does anything change about the sort of framework that you've offered when you think about it in terms of a job interview or networking?
So I think a job interview and networking are 2 very different situations, because a job interview really is that's a perfect example of what you gave me, Jeff, about there's a time when you need to say certain things. There are certain things you need to get out there. You need to mention this experience, you need to mention this credential, you need to mention what you did or achieved for this organization. So in a job interview, you want to listen in a focused way to the question to make sure that you're answering the right question, but you don't really want to try to encourage further questions, if that makes sense. So in a job interview, one thing you could do is recap the question to make sure you're answering the right one. So you're asking me about my experience dealing with difficult situations. And then you say, I've dealt with difficult situations, and give your answer. And also in a job interview, the last technique about opening your heart to your interviewers can help create an emotional connection with the people who are interviewing you and help you understand them and them understand you. So those are my 2 favorite for job interviews. Now, professional networking is different, because from my perspective anyway, networking isn't about impressing people or showing off your credentials or whatever. Networking is about making a connection where you understand each other for the future. So often it's about knowing them well enough that you stay in touch in a way that's useful to them. Like, I like to think of networking as looking for ways that I can be of service to good people doing good stuff. And if I listen to them sincerely and I know what they care about and they're interested in, then when I see, you know, a blog post they might like or a movie they might be interested in or a new book, and I can write to them and say, hey, remember this, you know, and deepen that connection between us. so that someday, you know, if I want to ask about a job at their organization, or if I need a really good consultant and I know that's what they do. So I think networking is more like a classic connecting to another person conversation. It isn't so much about impressing people.
Great. Well, Alanna, as I alluded to, I feel like I could probably talk to you for a couple hours about all the ways that I need help listening. If there are folks on the webinar today that are interested in following up with you, what's the right way for them to do that?
Oh yeah, sorry, I have a slide for that. There it is. I have a website, thisworldneedsbrave.com, and I have blog posts there about coaching and about international development, because it's sort of my home on the web. And then you can email me, alanna@needsbrave.com. If you've got questions about what I talked about, or if you saw an interesting article you think I'd like to read, I would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, Alanna, thank you so much for being here today and sharing this with us. Again, the framework you offered, super important to me. I know I'm going to keep working on it in my life and hopefully get better. If I don't assume I'll ever be perfect at it, but this is really helpful. So thank you so much for doing this for all of our alumni around the world. We really appreciate it.
I was happy. Thanks to everyone for coming here today, or tuning in today.
My thanks also go out to all of our guests for participating today. I specifically want to thank those of you who've donated to BU in the past. We have 5 excellent more webinars coming up just in March alone as part of Alumni Career Weeks, where we have over 60 career events taking place online in cities around the world. We still have about half of the month to go, so I'd encourage all of you to check out what's happening in cities near you, or other webinar or online speed networking opportunities, by visiting our dedicated site at www.bu.edu/careerweeks. And as always, if you or any BU alum you know would be interested in doing a professional development webinar like this for the BU community, I'd ask that you please contact me at the Alumni Relations Office. You're welcome to email me at jtmurphy@bu.edu. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Have a great day or a great evening wherever you might be.